The will was read in a room so silent you could hear the ticking of my father's old pocket watch, clutched in my trembling hand. My sister-in-law, Claire, sat across from me, her manicured nails tapping the mahogany table, her smile sharp as a blade. By the time the lawyer's voice faded, I was hollowed out. My inheritance, the legacy my parents built, was gone, siphoned into Claire's hands through a loophole nobody saw coming. I'm Emma, 35, the youngest of 3 siblings, and the one who stayed behind in our small New England town to care for Mom and Dad through their final years. My brother James, older by 5 years, had moved to Boston with Claire, his wife of a decade, chasing big city dreams. Our eldest sibling, Lily, died young, leaving a wound that never quite healed. The family estate, our childhood home, the orchard, the savings, was meant to be split between James and me. Dad's will was clear, or so I thought. But Claire, with her lawyer's finesse and a forged document, had rewritten the story. "It's what your father wanted," she said, her voice syrupy with false sympathy as she claimed the lion's share. James, sitting beside her, looked away, his jaw tight. I felt the betrayal like a knife twisting in my gut. That night, I sat in the attic of the old house, surrounded by boxes of Mom's letters and Dad's journals. The air smelled of dust and memory. I wasn't looking for evidence, just solace. But then I found it. A small, unmarked USB drive tucked inside Dad's watch case. My hands shook as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered, revealing grainy footage from a hidden camera in Dad's study. There was Claire, months before his death, rifling through his desk, slipping papers into her bag. My breath caught. This wasn't just theft, it was a calculated betrayal. The next morning, I called James. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the rage bubbling inside. He arrived alone, his face drawn, eyes heavy with guilt. "Emma, I didn't know," he whispered, but I wasn't sure I believed him. Claire had always been the puppeteer, pulling his strings with her charm and ambition. I showed him the footage. His hands clenched into fists as Claire's voice echoed through the laptop speakers, smugly discussing securing the future. James's silence was deafening, but his eyes burned with something new, resolve. We spent the next week digging. Claire had been clever, using her legal connections to manipulate the will's execution. She'd convinced the lawyer that Dad had amended it in her favor, citing a private conversation nobody could verify. The forged document was flawless, but the footage was damning. I wanted to storm into her office and confront her, but James stopped me. "We need a plan," he said. "She's not just going to admit it." He was right. Claire was a chess player, always 3 moves ahead. But she didn't know about the USB. I started watching her. Claire lived in a glass-walled condo in Boston, all sharp edges and cold luxury. She hosted charity galas, smiled for cameras, and played the grieving daughter-in-law to perfection. But I saw the cracks, her late-night calls, the way she flinched when James mentioned the estate. I began recording her movements, using my old DSLR camera to capture her meetings with shady contacts. Each photo, each clip, was another piece of the puzzle. I wasn't just fighting for money. This was about justice, about protecting what Mom and Dad had built. By the end of the week, James and I had a plan. We'd confront Claire at the annual family gathering, a tradition Mom had loved. It was held at the orchard, under the apple trees heavy with fruit. Claire would be there, playing her part as the dutiful wife. But we'd have the footage, the photos, and a lawyer of our own, one who wasn't in Claire's pocket. The stage was set, and my heart pounded with a mix of fear and anticipation. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about exposing the truth, no matter the cost. The orchard smelled of ripe apples and late summer, but the air was thick with tension as guests arrived for the family gathering. Claire swept in, her designer dress catching the sunlight, her laughter loud enough to mask the unease in her eyes. I stood by the old barn, clutching a glass of cider, watching her work the crowd. James was nearby, his face a mask of calm, but I could see the storm brewing in his clenched fists. Tonight, we'd unravel her. The plan was simple but risky. We'd play the footage on a projector during the toast, when everyone, cousins, aunts, family friends, was gathered. Our lawyer, Miss Harper, A sharp woman with a reputation for dismantling fraud had reviewed the evidence. "It's airtight," she'd said, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "But you need to be ready for the fallout." I was. Claire had taken more than money. She'd stolen my trust, my family's legacy, my peace. I wanted her to feel that loss. As the sun dipped below the horizon, James called for attention. The crowd gathered under a canopy of string lights, their faces soft with nostalgia. Claire stood beside him, her arm looped through his, oblivious to the trap. I nodded to Ms. Harper, who dimmed the lights and started the projector. The screen flickered to life, and there was Claire, caught on Dad's hidden camera, her voice cold as she discussed forging the will. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire's smile froze, then shattered. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shrill as she yanked her arm from James. He didn't flinch. "The truth," he said, his tone low and dangerous. The footage rolled on, showing her slipping documents into her bag, her laughter as she bragged about outsmarting us. I stepped forward, holding up the USB drive. "You thought you could erase our parents' wishes," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "But Dad was smarter than you." Claire's face turned ashen. She lunged for the projector, but Ms. Harper blocked her, calm and unyielding. The crowd was whispering now, their shock turning to anger. Claire's allies, her lawyer, a few distant cousins she'd charmed, shifted uncomfortably. I saw James's shoulders slump, not with relief, but with the weight of betrayal. His wife, the woman he'd loved, had built their life on a lie. The confrontation didn't end there. Claire tried to spin a story, claiming the footage was manipulated, that she'd only acted to protect the family. But Ms. Harper was ready, presenting the forged will alongside Dad's original, witnessed and notarized. The discrepancies were glaring. Claire's voice cracked as she pleaded with James, but he turned away, his silence louder than any words. I felt a pang of pity, not for her, but for him. He'd lost more than I had. As the guests dispersed, whispering about the scandal, James and I sat on the porch, the orchard quiet around us. "I should have seen it," he said, his voice raw. I touched his arm. "We both missed it. But we're fixing it now." Ms. Harper joined us, outlining the next steps. A lawsuit to reclaim the estate, potential criminal charges for fraud. The road ahead would be long, but the truth was on our side. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope, fragile but real. The weeks after the gathering were a whirlwind of legal battles and whispered gossip. Claire vanished from the public eye, retreating to her condo, but her absence didn't mean surrender. She hired a new lawyer, a shark named Grayson, who filed countersuits claiming defamation and emotional distress. I wasn't surprised. Claire thrived on manipulation, but it stung to see her drag our family's name through the mud. James, meanwhile, was unraveling, torn between loyalty to his wife and the undeniable evidence of her betrayal. I threw myself into the fight. Ms. Harper's office became my second home, a cluttered space filled with coffee cups and legal pads. We combed through bank records, tracing Claire's transactions to offshore accounts she thought were hidden. Each discovery was a small victory, but it came at a cost. I barely slept, haunted by memories of Dad's pride in the orchard, Mom's laughter in the kitchen. Claire had tainted those memories, and I hated her for it. James was struggling too, but in a different way. He moved back to the family home, sleeping in his old room, surrounded by ghosts. One night, I found him in Dad's study, staring at the desk where Claire had been caught on camera. "I loved her, Emma," he said, his voice breaking. "How did I not see this?" I didn't have an answer, only a hug. We were both grieving, not just the inheritance, but the trust we'd lost. Then came a breakthrough. Ms. Harper found a witness, Dad's old accountant, Mr. Reynolds, who'd retired but remembered a strange call from Claire months before Dad's death. She'd asked about the estate's value, probing for weaknesses. His testimony, combined with the footage, strengthened our case. But Claire wasn't done. Grayson produced a letter, allegedly from Dad, claiming he'd wanted Claire to manage the estate. It was another forgery, but it muddied the waters, delaying the lawsuit. I started to notice odd things. My car tires slashed, anonymous calls late at night. Claire was playing dirty, trying to scare me off. I doubled down, installing cameras around the house and orchard. If she wanted a war, I'd give her one. James, though, was slipping. He stopped eating, barely spoke. I worried he'd break before we could win. One evening, I caught him on the phone with Claire, his voice soft, almost pleading. "Don't do this," I said, snatching the phone away. Claire's voice hissed through the speaker, promising to destroy us. I hung up, my hands shaking. "She's using you," I told James. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about money. It was about saving my brother from the woman who'd broken him. By the end of the month, Ms. Harper had enough evidence to push for a court date. The footage, the accountant's testimony, the bank records. It was a mountain Claire couldn't climb. But she was cunning, and I knew she'd have one last trick. I just didn't know what. As we prepared for trial, I sat in the orchard, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. This wasn't over, but I was ready to fight. For Dad, for Mom, for the family we'd been before Claire tore it apart. The courtroom was a cold, sterile place. Nothing like the warm chaos of the orchard. Claire sat across from us, her face a mask of composure, but her eyes darted nervously. James sat beside me, his hands folded tightly, as if holding himself together. Ms. Harper stood tall, her voice cutting through the room as she presented our case. The footage, the forged will, the accountant's testimony. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, listened intently, her pen scratching notes. Claire's lawyer, Grayson, was a showman, spinning tales of her devotion to the family. He painted me as a jealous sister, desperate to undermine Claire's legitimate claim. It was infuriating, but Ms. Harper had warned me. Let them talk. The evidence speaks louder. And it did. When the footage played, the courtroom fell silent. Claire's smug smile on the screen was a stark contrast to her pale face now. Grayson tried to discredit it, claiming tampering, but our tech expert dismantled his argument with forensic analysis. Then came the bombshell. Ms. Harper called a surprise witness. Claire's former assistant, Tara, a nervous young woman who'd quit months ago. Tara testified that Claire had pressured her to backdate documents, threatening her job if she refused. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Claire's composure cracked. She whispered furiously to Grayson, who looked rattled for the first time. James's head dropped into his hands, and I squeezed his shoulder, my heart aching for him. Outside the courtroom, the media had caught wind of the scandal. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions about the inheritance heist. I shielded James as we pushed through, his face gray with shame. Back at the house, he broke down, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since Lily's funeral. "I trusted her," he said, over and over. I held him, my own tears falling. This wasn't just about money. It was about the family we'd lost, the bonds Claire had shattered. Claire wasn't giving up. She launched a smear campaign, leaking stories to tabloids about my instability and James's weakness. It hurt, but it also backfired. Old family friends rallied around us, sharing stories of Claire's manipulations over the years. A cousin revealed she'd tried to borrow money from him, claiming the estate was tied up. Each story was another nail in her coffin. As the trial continued, Ms. Harper uncovered more. Claire had been siphoning funds from the estate for years, funneling them into a shell company. The evidence was overwhelming, but Claire's final move was desperate. She offered a settlement, half the estate, no charges. James wavered, his heart still tangled in his love for her. I refused. "This isn't about money anymore," I told him. "It's about justice." He nodded, slowly, and we pushed forward, ready to see this through to the end. The trial stretched into weeks, each day a grueling battle of words and evidence. Claire's defenses were crumbling, but she fought with the desperation of a cornered animal. Grayson tried to shift blame, suggesting James had known about the forgery and approved it. It was a low blow, and I saw the pain in my brother's eyes as the accusation landed. But Ms. Harper was relentless, presenting emails between Claire and her accomplices that left no doubt. She'd acted alone. One night, after a particularly brutal day in court, I found a note slipped under my door. "Drop the case, or you'll regret it." It read, in sharp, angry handwriting. I showed it to Ms. Harper, who immediately hired a private investigator. The note traced back to one of Claire's associates, a small-time crook she'd paid to intimidate me. It was another misstep, and the judge wasn't pleased. Claire's credibility was in tatters. James was barely holding on. He stopped coming to court, unable to face Claire's lies. I found him one evening in the orchard, sitting under Mom's favorite apple tree. "I don't know who I am without her," he admitted, his voice hollow. I knelt beside him, the grass cool against my knees. "You're James," I said. "You're my brother, Dad's son, Mom's pride. She doesn't define you." For the first time, I saw a flicker of strength in his eyes. The turning point came when Ms. Harper presented the shell company's financial records. Claire had funneled millions into it, buying properties and luxury cars under false names. The judge's face hardened as the scope of her greed became clear. Even Grayson seemed deflated, his arguments growing weaker. Claire's composure finally broke. She sobbed in the courtroom, but it was too late for tears. The judge ordered a freeze on her assets, pending the final ruling. Outside, the world was watching. The scandal had gone viral, with hashtags like inheritance heist trending. I hated the attention, but it brought unexpected allies, lawyers offering pro bono help, strangers sharing their own stories of betrayal. It reminded me that this fight wasn't just ours. It was for anyone who'd been cheated by greed. As the trial neared its end, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. Claire's empire of lies was collapsing, but the cost had been high. James was a shadow of himself, and I carried scars I'd never show. Yet, in the orchard, under the stars, I felt Mom and Dad's presence, urging us on. We were close, so close, to reclaiming what was ours, not just in money, but in truth. The final day of the trial was electric with anticipation. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with the weight of what was coming. Claire sat alone, Grayson's confidence gone, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. James was back, sitting beside me, his hand gripping mine. Ms. Harper stood ready, her closing argument a masterpiece of clarity and passion. She laid out Claire's scheme, every lie, every forged document, every stolen dollar, with surgical precision. The judge deliberated for 2 agonizing days. We waited in the orchard, James and I, barely speaking, just existing in the quiet of our childhood home. When the call came, my heart stopped. The judge ruled in our favor. The estate was ours, Claire's claims nullified. She faced criminal charges for fraud and forgery, with a hearing set for next month. The courtroom erupted, but Claire just sat there, staring at nothing, her world shattered. The victory was bittersweet. James moved back to Boston, but not to Claire's condo. He rented a small apartment, starting over. I stayed in the family home, sorting through the wreckage of our lives. The orchard needed work, the house needed repairs, but it was ours again. I found myself visiting Mom's garden daily, tending her roses, feeling her strength in every bloom. Claire's downfall was public and brutal. The media tore into her, her charity galas canceled, her reputation in ruins. I didn't gloat. It wasn't joy I felt, but relief. She'd underestimated us, thought her charm could outshine the truth. The hidden footage, Dad's last gift, had been her undoing. James and I started rebuilding, not just the estate, but our bond. We talked late into the night, remembering Lily, Mom, Dad. We laughed, cried, healed. The money was important, but the real inheritance was this: our family, our memories, our resilience. Claire had tried to steal that, but she'd failed. As winter approached, I found a letter from Dad in his study, tucked in a book. "Protect what matters," he'd written. I smiled, tears falling. We had, and we would keep protecting it, for him, for Mom, for Lily, for us. Spring came to the orchard, the apple trees bursting with blossoms. The house was alive again, filled with the scent of fresh paint and the sound of laughter. James and I had spent months restoring it, pouring love into every corner. The estate was more than property. It was our history, our heart. Claire's trial was over. She'd been sentenced to 5 years for fraud, her assets seized to repay what she'd stolen. Justice felt cold, but it was done. I started a foundation in Mom and Dad's name, using part of the inheritance to fund local charities. It was what they'd have wanted, a legacy of giving, not greed. James helped, finding purpose in the work. He was healing, slowly, his smile returning. We hosted a community event in the orchard, kids running through the trees, families sharing stories. It felt like Mom was there, her spirit in every laugh. One evening, I found another USB drive in Dad's study, labeled for Emma and James. It held videos, home movies of us as kids, Lily chasing us through the orchard, Mom and Dad dancing in the kitchen. We watched them together, tears streaming down our faces. "We're okay," James said, his voice steady. I nodded. We were more than okay. We were whole. Claire sent a letter from prison, an apology that felt hollow. I didn't respond. Forgiveness might come someday, but not yet. For now, I focused on the future, rebuilding, loving, living. The orchard bloomed, the house stood strong, and we carried on, carrying our parents' love in every step. The hidden footage had saved us, but it was our strength, James's, mine, our families, that truly won. We'd faced betrayal, fought for truth, and come out stronger. As I stood under the apple trees, the sun warm on my face, I knew we'd honored our inheritance, not just in money, but in the unbreakable bond of family.